All right, let's get started. Hi, everybody. My name is Vicente Partida. I'm the Director of Communications at the Specialty Coffee Association. Welcome to this special webinar. This is a mid-year update on the SCA's initiative related to the price crisis in coffee. And so today we're going to be talking a little bit about the work that this team of volunteers and staff have been doing for the past few months on the price crisis. We'll be introducing you to our panelists. Let me introduce you to our panelists today. On the call today is Kim Elena Ionescu. She's the SCA Chief Sustainability Officer. Hi, Kim. Also on the line is Ellie Hudson. She is SCA's Director of Strategy and Steering for Advocacy. And they both have been working on the price crisis response initiative of the SCA. Today, I'm going to be I'll be in the background looking at your questions, and Ellie and Kim Elena will be having a conversation about the work that this team has been doing. Before we get started, I just wanted to let you all know that this webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, to SCA News, and to the SCA podcast, so you'll be able to share it with your colleagues. Anyone who isn't able to join us will be able to listen to it, but also view it on YouTube. If you are on this call, know that you can submit your questions, and we encourage you to submit your questions using the questions panel, which you should see on the left-hand side if you've joined us on the web. If you are on the phone, we encourage you to jump on your laptop, your computer, your phone, so you can submit your questions using that questions panel. And you also have the option to use the raise hand function, which you should see a little icon with a hand up. If you want to ask a question using your audio, if you want to have a conversation with Ellie and Kim Elena today. So we definitely encourage you to use that as well. Let's go over what we will cover today. So we're going to have a general overview of what what we call internally the PCR, the Price Crisis Response Initiative, the overview of the SCA's response to the price crisis in coffee. Kim Elena and Ellie will review the history of this problem using an assessment called the stages of a crisis. Following that, we'll discuss the draft recommendations from the SCA's price crisis response team. And you'll get to know a little bit about how you can contribute to this work in the short and the long term. And at the end of the call, hopefully we've got plenty of time for this. We'll have time for some Q&A. And as a reminder, you'll be able to submit your questions using the questions panel, but also raise your hand if you'd like to speak to Kim Elena and to Ellie. So let me hand it off now to Kim Elena.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Vicente, for hosting. Ellie and I have both been on the background or been the hosts for some price crisis response webinars over the past couple of months. And so I very much appreciate the work that you're doing to channel us questions and keep our slides moving. So, as Vicente said, I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer for the SCA, and I'm part of this price crisis response core group or team that's been working on this since we formally launched this initiative in December of 2018. So because we've called this a mid-year update, I'm going to go through some of where we are in this initiative, but I want to focus less on the specifics of where we've gathered and exactly who we've talked to and who said what, and more on some of the emerging themes and the conclusions that we are in the process of arriving to through the work that we are doing. So as I said, we launched this initiative formally in December of 2018, largely in response to the movement of the commodity futures market for coffee, which dropped below $1 in August of 2018, so almost exactly a year ago. And when we did this, we recognized that we wanted this to be a team that was led by staff, but also included some of our volunteer leadership. So next slide. So that team is pictured here in its almost entirety, and it includes, you can see, a couple of members of our SCA board of directors, Niels Hack, who represents a parallel or a coordinating initiative, the Sustainable Coffee Challenge, We've got Julie and Ellie and Rick and I from the SCA staff. And then also we have a lot of support from Forum for the Future, which is a third-party facilitator that we contracted early in 2019 to lead us in the convenings that we're doing and in the research, and toward the end of the year and the conclusion of this first phase of this price crisis response initiative. So this is our lovely team. Next slide. And so the journey that we are on, we kicked this off and spent the first couple of months identifying this team, establishing some goals, what we thought would be within the scope of this initiative in the first year at least, and the timelines. So how would we make progress? What were we expecting to be able to present to stakeholder groups, including staff and board of directors, but also the membership, the broader community, and webinars like this are part of that, that reporting process. We've also spent a substantial amount of time since then doing research, which has taken a couple of different forms. One of those forms is, you might expect, like desk research. So reading everything that we can get our hands on about the root causes for the price crisis that we're in, but also about other times in which we've used this language in coffee, experiences from other sectors that might be illustrative or educational for informative for us. But in addition to desk research about things that have been tried and worked or not, we've also considered that some of the convenings that we've done with different diverse groups of stakeholders are a part of that research also. So one way in which we can learn about especially current realities is by gathering groups of people together and facilitating conversations and asking challenging questions and seeing what kind of ideas people are bringing to this this crisis in this moment. So that's where we are here, having concluded 3 of these convenings over the past 3 months in New York, Berlin, and Campinas, Brazil. And we're just sort of transitioning into having a map of the system, or of the coffee systems, because it's not just one, but that will help us to identify what our actions are as an association and as specialty coffee more broadly, what the leverage points and interventions are. And once we've done that, we can go into this implementation phase, which is something that I think that everyone would agree unanimously is going to take a lot more than just a year to do. But that we know we will have succeeded in terms of the initiative, and if we embed this in the SCA's work completely, so that it is no longer an initiative of the SCA, but it becomes fundamental to who the SCA is and how we operate into the future as an association. But anyway, all of this talk that I've been doing has been about the price crisis, and when we have done this during this research that we've done, one of the questions that came up pretty early was, when did this crisis begin? And did it really begin in August of 2018? Is the commodity futures market price, the arbiter of crisis? Why did we choose that moment to start calling it a crisis? Why are we calling this initiative the price crisis response? And during that exploration, one of the conversations that arose between me and my colleague Ellie is about how we define crisis and how we've done that in coffee in the past, but also how crises are identified and defined more broadly. So I'm going to pass the mic to Ellie to talk a little bit about stages of a crisis in general.
Thanks, Kim Elena, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and for your interest in this very serious, critical topic for all of us. So what you see here is a sort of graphic representation of stages of a crisis. How do we know when we're in a crisis? How is it distinct from an activity or a problem? Crisis is a really strong word, and it's something that really stirs a lot of emotion, and it's something that implies a large scale, there's a lot of things that we really understand about using the word crisis. So taking a step back and ensuring that we are using the word correctly, but also that we are doing the actual crisis service by systematically working through it. We use this model, and one of the things you can kind of see, there's 6 stages presented here. It's important to see that this is not presented in a linear format. Logically, we progress through warning, risk assessment, response, management, resolution, and recovery in that order. However, it's possible and really common to be in multiple stages at the same time. Crises don't follow a sort of discrete set of activities. Often you may be able to start responding while you're still assessing risk. In the case of the price crisis, that's absolutely true of the PCR team and the work that we've been doing. We once we started heeding the warnings, which I'll talk about in a second, we launched into the risk assessment and response stages right away. And there's a few reasons for that, again, that I'll get into. But it's important that although they do progress in a logical order, it's not one to the next to the next. It's nonlinear. As far as the warning of the SCA price crisis, with being the first stage, I think it's really important to acknowledge very simply that producers have been saying this for a long time, have been warning the industry about the potential of us getting to where we are. This is captured really well and summarized in other places, other media, including the 2019 RICO presentation given by Rick Reinhardt, and the earlier webinar where Rick introduced this initiative from February 2019. And so we're not going to get into the details here, but they are available for those that want them. And I think also, just generally from the SCA standpoint, it's while the producer community was warning us about this, the SCA Sustainability Center absolutely was already responding. And a lot of this work was done by incredibly devoted volunteers and the farmer profitability and prosperity working groups in particular of the Sustainability Advisory Council. But naming it a crisis and launching the PCR, it had the impact of making it a central priority for the whole organization. And we hope to inspire the industry in the whole sector rather than a set of priorities for some very capable experts. Big difference. So we recognize that moment. And certainly some of the other warning signs, the 2013 leaf rust in some regions of coffee production. There's also some of these areas that have not fully recovered, and certainly the communities that were impacted by leaf rust suffered some economic and social safety net loss. And these are some of the things that are really required to insulate against price shocks. So we know that that's been a big warning sign. I think that it's useful sometimes to step out of coffee for a second and think about a crisis that hopefully most of us would share knowledge of and not firsthand experience, which is the global financial crisis. Thinking about the global financial crisis, it's something that we associate with the year 2008. But looking back on it, the warning signs aren't from 2008. Often the collapse of Bear Stearns is sort of cited as the beginning of the global financial crisis, but the warning signs extend certainly well into the early 2000s and even before, with interest rates being low and the credit default swaps growing in popularity, and many credible voices saying this doesn't make any sense and this is going to end up causing a financial crisis, and then it certainly did. So I think that the important thing about the warning stage is that recognizing these signs and starting to progress through to the next stages of risk assessment and the responses. Some other sort of points that we think about within the warnings are the moment in 2018 August, where the commodity futures market, or the C, fell below the fair trade minimum price, which was $1.40 at the time, or I'm sorry, that was November 2016, not August of 18. Many organizations expressed their concerns publicly at that time. So we're talking about November of 2016. August of 2018, when the C market fell below $1. and that was the first time in more than a decade. That's when we really saw the word crisis start to appear in trade and mass media inside and outside of coffee. And then the formation of the SCA PCR really started with that moment as well. Acknowledging these warnings, and certainly those within the SCA community and outside of it, and a symbolic end to the warning stage. So that's when we begin in earnest in these next stages. I think that anticipating that many participants of this webinar may be interested in more, you know, I don't want you to take my word for it. I'd love for you to hear it directly from producers in particular. We have provided a couple of media. The declaration from Nairobi, which was written in March of this year, summarizes a lot of what producer organizations said in their own words. And so, Vicente, I don't know if we were able to pull that up for download, or if we can just address that at the end of the webinar. We can tell people to email us.
The handouts function is not working for some reason, so we will email everybody who signed up for the webinar.
Okay, great. So we have a couple of pieces, including that Nairobi declaration and a background piece from the ICO that are especially useful. But we're going to talk about this in a little bit. There's actually quite a bit of credible information out there, learning and imploring us to educate ourselves on that. Moving on then to risk assessment and response. So we said sort of the symbolic end to the warning stage and the initiation of the PCR within, again, this idea of stages of any crisis, not specific to us. We did decide to undertake risk assessment and responding at the very beginning concurrently. So we began with the risk assessment. One example is that we started convening stakeholders. And so far there have been 3 in New York, USA, Berlin, and Campinas, Brazil, Berlin, Germany, and Campinas, Brazil. So a couple of samplings of the outputs. And so this is one bulleted list from one of those 3 convenings that I'm showing to you here. Just this idea of how we're really, what we mean when we say risk assessment. So we've got this gender non-binary person climbing rocks here, and they are really looking at how to get to the top and the best ways to do that. Risk assessment is certainly a part of this. I think this is an illustrative example of how we see it. So really, this is an example from the New York workshop in the US. One of the outputs was really asking these questions about power imbalance and how it impacted the failure of the free market. Looking at the risk and sort of how it impacted us with the lack of external pressure, media or consumer attention on this crisis, although that is changing. Lack of creativity and innovation in this space, a market model that has been unchanged in recent experience, and lack of incentives for a new way of doing business. And so this, again, is an example of output of convenings of community members that really started to look and assess these risks, and these were the outputs. I'm going to tease a little bit right now a call to action that will come at the end of this webinar, which is a call to action to a process we call peer review. So this is a sampling of the output of the New York convening, which was the first of the 3 that have happened. There is one more taking place in Washington, DC, USA in September. We know that not everyone who cares and not everyone who has something to say could be part of these convenings, and we're not going to just allow that to be the status quo. We want to hear from everyone in our community that has something to say and something to contribute, and questions to ask or challenges to raise. So we invite you to be part of the peer review process. I'm going to go over how to do that toward the end of the webinar, but this is a sampling of some of the things that we would send. The full document providing the full context for these bullet points, and asking you for your feedback on it. What do you think? What are your reactions? Do you challenge some of the assumptions? Do you have some firsthand experience to contribute? So that's a little bit of a side note, but this is just an example, again, of what the PCR has been doing within this risk assessment phase. This is also, I want to ask Kim Elena a little bit about how the group arrived at these conclusions, and whether these conclusions were surprising. So we're going to be looking at root cause analysis and something called a causal loop in the next slide. But before we do that, I just want to pose that question to you, Kim. So how did the group get to this list, and were we surprised?
Yeah, like so many of the conversations that end up probing deeper into problems start with a relatively simple question that addresses something kind of superficial and immediate. Like in this case, it would have been something like, what is the greatest threat right now? When you think about the coffee price crisis, what do you think the greatest risk is? And from the sum total of the answers that we got to that question about people thinking right now, how am I feeling? What am I thinking? What does my gut tell me? Digging deeper into that and asking, well, why is that a risk? And where did that come from? Because so many times, if we just try to address things on the surface, then we might get some sort of catharsis that comes with taking an action or sort of solving a problem that's right in front of us. But we don't give ourselves any sort of chance of solving for the longer term underlying issues or the root causes here. So when we ask a question about risks and someone says that producers are unable to cover their costs of production, well, why is that? Why is it that that producers aren't able to cover cost of production? And if you ask why enough times, then ultimately you end up getting to things like power imbalance and free market failure. So it's a few steps, but it doesn't take especially long. And it seems like with just about every action that we want to take or problem that we want to fix, we realize it's a lot deeper than that. And we also, we get to seeing the risk not only of the current situation, but the risk of not taking action, which I think it could be the other side of the coin or a corollary to this slide. And that in every conversation also, we get to this point of needing to acknowledge that if we don't take action to address some of the, the power balance, or if we don't exercise some creativity and foster innovation in the space, then we stand to lose a lot, not only as individuals who are particularly attuned to this, or who spend a lot of time or spend a lot of their career working on this, but also as an entire specialty sector, because we arrive quickly at the understanding that, where coffee goes in general, specialty goes with it, and maybe goes even faster. So that as we talk about a lack of creativity or no new ways of doing business, we realize that we really have a lot to lose, and I think we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Thank you. And just recalling the previous slide where it said, we are here, and it alluded to this idea of a system map. So the two major outputs of response, in addition to the early actions that we started to do that we knew we could, partnering with humanitarian organizations as one example. The system map and another asset called a landscape assessment are the two major outputs of this response stage that we are working toward. And yeah, so we are here. So the map the system, this dotted line could almost go like right through number 3, like we're in that stage, but not all the way through it. We have started it. And so again, teasing the peer review process and inviting everyone to be part of it that's interested. The system map, we have some draft pieces of that really ready to share with our peer reviewers. So draft format, meaning we are awaiting your feedback before it's finalized. And then the landscape assessment, Kim mentioned earlier, the research that has been done, the output of the desk research and other formal methods of research is an asset called a landscape assessment. This is going to be presented in draft form to the group that convenes in Washington in mid-September. And then after that, it will be available. So again, the draft landscape assessment will be available to peer reviewers and continuing on following that convening. So there are many opportunities to review the work in progress of the crisis response team. And the system map includes some major outputs from the Campinas, Brazil activity, where many producers were brought together in facilitated meetings over 2 days in Brazil, and actually visited a coffee farm as part of that activity to really start testing these assumptions. And if we can advance, I think, 2 slides, and we can take a look at the first causal loop. Great. So this is an example of some of the output from Campinas of these convenings of not just producers, but many producers, included many producers. So there were 4 total causal loops identified and created through the work of these groups. We debated a little bit of whether to even include this because the font is a little small. It's a little bit probably hard to understand without context, but I think it's very visually striking and interesting. And so I advocated to just include one as an example. There are 4. Again, this will be emailed to all participants, all 4, and this is available in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and Portuguese. So there are 4 total causal loops. And what this shows is, I think, something that any of us that have been paying attention and working in the coffee sector really maybe feel or know inherently, which is that we're in these closed loops that don't allow us to easily make one shift in action ourselves and start to cure the coffee price crisis. So this really defines the problem. How did we get here? But very specifically, how some actions relate to others. And you can see these are closed loops. All 4 of them are. This is one of the least complicated, or complex, I should say, of the 4. But this is just really trying to address why are money and power concentrated in the coffee value chain. So here's the distillation of many different works of many different groups that was created to show the root causes. Understanding these root causes, this is the whole point of a risk assessment stage. We have begun to respond as well, but this is what's going to take us into those final 3 stages of starting with the management of the crisis, which is when we really start these organized interventions. I think that it's a good place for us to also address something that might be easy to overlook, which is the final risk. What is the risk if we do nothing, or the risk of inaction? And this is something that I don't think anybody's suggesting we do nothing, but it's important for our group to really understand what's at stake in maintaining the status quo. There will be, we believe in the recommendations, we are beginning to uncover some very provocative recommendations. So I think it's really important to understand what the stakes are in not doing these when it becomes difficult or painful. I'm going to ask Kim to talk a little bit about this, because I think she's been studying this for many years, along with leadership volunteers within the Sustainability Center of the SCA. And so, Kim, can you tell us a little bit about what we think we know about the risk of inaction?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that back. I feel like I started to try to launch into this on the last slide, but it's a better illustration here, because you can see when you look at this, you know, the particular causal loop that we're looking at here has one of the same sort of like risks that we identified on the last slide about power being concentrated, or power imbalance, I think was the wording on the last slide. But again, it's not just to say that this exists, to be able to name it as true, but to understand, you know, why it is that way. How does the system, or how do systems reinforce that reality? And only by diagramming it out and identifying how different factors work together, some of which might be seemingly unrelated if you didn't drew them a different way, or if you discussed them in different conversations, can you begin to identify the intervention points? You know, where is it that that we, and that could be we as the association proper, or it could be we as specialty coffee, it could be, you know, certain, say, business types, or value chain representatives, some people on this call and other people on this call have opportunities to intervene and change something, and identifying, you know, who is, if all of these things, say, like if we, and maybe it's a stretch to say that we agree that all of these things are problems here, all of the sub contributing factors to the loop, but if we did, if we did agree on that all of these things are we desire to change somehow, then it's also identifying, who can do that, who's in the position to do that, who are we missing currently in order to be able to address those. And so that's one of the ways in which I see, the risk of inaction is that this loop just continues, and it gets sort of tighter and tighter, and it's more and more efficient in delivering what it is that it's designed to deliver. So if we agree that money and power are concentrated and that we have a system that's done that, then if we let things lie, it will just continue to do that better and better for the foreseeable future. So if if companies are say homogenous companies are making homogenous decisions, then what is going to change that? And one of the conclusions from the workshop that we did in Berlin was that the SCA has a responsibility and an opportunity to speak to this, and that one in particular about the decisions that companies make, given our representation and given the platform that we have. But what is the risk of doing so? What sort of challenges are we posing to business as usual? But then also, what is the risk of inaction? What do we stand to lose? And when we talk about homogeneity in terms of the market, but also in terms of coffee production, then the more homogeneous coffee is, the less room there is for specialty, which is completely predicated on having something to differentiate it from the surrounding homogeneousness.
Thanks.
Yeah,
I think it's pretty serious when I can't help but feel that the seriousness and the gravity of the situation that we're in, really in looking at the risk of inaction. Well, I have you, Kim. I think that it's important for us to really understand this in the landscape of sustainability efforts writ large, past, present, and future, and sort of how we, as the SCA and the larger coffee sector, how do we plug into the sustainability landscape and the humanitarian landscape, especially.
Yeah, one of the conclusions from the New York workshop that we did was, as we were looking for short-term actions, knowing that we need to address, as I've already said, I'm sure probably multiple times by now, this large-scale crisis on a short and long-term horizon. I think that sometimes as we try to avoid thinking superficially, we can also miss opportunities and needs that are maybe immediate and don't necessarily address these sort of causal loops or underlying causes, but are needs nonetheless. And a call for partnership or for outreach to humanitarian aid organizations, especially thinking about the what in sort of coffee food security parlance we might call the thin months in the region of Central America, those being more or less now, that we may, even as we're trying to think long-term about structural inequality, there may be more and more coffee growers who are facing choices about whether or not they'll be able to buy food, whether they should migrate. And this has been reflected actually very recently in popular press articles about the connection between migration from Central America to the United States and low coffee prices, and all sorts of different entities now, including the public sector, like the United States government, see this as an area where there is some immediate need. And so having a coffee and a specialty presence in those conversations and trying to bring different actors together is the way in which we can both think long-term about the future that we want, this sort of system that we want to create, and also how to make sure that we're not ignoring the immediate and very real issues that members of our community are facing on a daily basis. And those partnerships are not new to coffee. I mean, many coffee companies will have long-term relationships with many development organizations. Some of those have been really successful and celebrated. But one thing that struck me when I went back and reread a publication that we were part of in 2016, a coffee sustainability catalog that we contributed to along with a few other platforms and collaborative organizations, was that the priorities for development organizations and coffee companies when it comes to investing in sustainability tend to be pretty different, and that many of the NGOs will address first some sort of component of the social fabric in a coffee producing community, coffee producers themselves or the community around them, and that when industry invests, it's more likely to be in some kind of farming practice. Technical assistance is where the lion's share of industry investment in sustainability has gone over the past, and this was from 2016. So, you know, that's the caveat that it's possible that it's changed, but I don't, I don't expect that that's the case. And a lot of that technical assistance has come in the form of productivity improvements. And on an individual level or a community level, that can be really fundamental to being a market, actor, or having enough coffee to even, potentially for the possibility of covering your operating costs as a small business. But it can also, when we step back, we can see in aggregate that we're in a situation now where we have a global oversupply of coffee, or where demand is not meeting the supply that we have. And so in that sense, when we think about causes, then it's hard not to at least wonder, not on an individual farm level, but again, in aggregate, what has our drive for productivity improvement as a pathway out of, unprofitability? What has that led to? What have been the unintended consequences of that? So as we, I think as we partner and as we are facing this current crisis, then this is one of those opportunities to look at the choices that we've made in the past and how they have succeeded, why we made them, but then also what kind of decisions we would make differently now with the benefit of hindsight. So maybe that's a good segue into talking about, like more of those sorts of actions besides humanitarian aid that we've identified. So another theme that's emerged really strongly and that I'm excited about, and I think a lot of people are, is the concept of living wage and living income in coffee, or for coffee growers. And it's interesting because it's emerging not just in coffee, but in all sorts of agricultural sectors. We've had a couple of really compelling examples come to us from cocoa, from bananas, from the Global Living Wage Coalition, which is active right now and convening also around this topic in particular. There's a lot of expertise there, but not much of it has come from coffee to date. So that to me speaks to the opportunity that we have with the, in many cases, that close relationships that that coffee companies may have with throughout their supply chains. That producers may have more access to buyers in coffee supply chains than in banana or in cocoa supply chains. I think there's a lot of interest there. There's a lot to learn, and I'm excited to bring more information about that to the SCA audience and the specialty community in the months to come. What are you excited about, Ellie?
Well, I think building on that, there's several themes that we've started to see emerge that we expect will be the framework for stage 4 management. I think that the moving into this stage of management is, it feels a little bit like the promised land, as many of us, and we have fielded a lot of questions about action and how do I get involved. I think this is where we really are able to start start working on organized interventions. And that is really exciting. You mentioned the living income movement. Some of the other things that are particularly exciting, we've seen the need for us to engage legal experts on the antitrust landscape and making sure that we stay on the safe side of antitrust laws and ethical practices as well. Certainly emphasizing that partnering with experts on that to lead us. And I think that really learning about how many sustainability efforts in other industries, pineapples is one that we study a little more closely, have run into that. I think being able to learn from that and anticipate that, but also engage those experts, which we've begun to do. Don't forget about consumers. This is another one. I think that there's definitely a role, and the call to action of delivering full price transparency across the supply chain, technology-driven traceability. We hear a lot about blockchain as one example. But the thing I'm most excited about is the huge call to action that we've alluded to and mentioned a couple times, which is this peer review process that we are asking our community to be part of. Can we take a look at the next slide? So if any of this sounds interesting, I promise you it is a very small sampling of the work done to date, and we really do hope that many people can be involved in reviewing it, providing anything from a reaction. It can be, I like it, I don't like it. That's useful. Or really articulate feedback, systematic feedback, any of the documents. We have the outputs from 3 convenings. We have the causal loops and the overall framework, which we call our terms of reference. These are 5 documents that are available for peer review now. If you want to be a peer reviewer, all you have to do is email us, pricecrisis@sca.coffee, and you will get those materials. We're asking for feedback on these by the end of August. Feedback is always welcome, but in order for us to continue to incorporate it on the work in progress, obviously there has to be a deadline. Then there will probably be a couple more that we're looking at sending out this week. And if there's one in particular, if you just want to see the causal loops, go ahead and mention that, and we'll make sure that's what you get to see. And then certainly the additional resources available at sca.coffee/pricecrisis. So this is the thing, this peer review process is something I'm most excited about. I think it's a really progressive and open way of working that we're seeing in lots of organizations, showing work in progress. So it's not finished, but I think acknowledging that while it may still, the rough edges are visible, the thing that's missing is your voice, and it's important.
One of the most moving moments of RICO for me back in April, and this was an event that was pretty much solely dedicated to the price crisis as a concept and approaches and causes and actions, was during a discussion session when a tenured SCA staffer explained that within this initiative we would be talking to everyone we knew about this and reaching out all over the place and gathering people together. And the person who'd asked the question challenged back, but you don't know me, so you're not going to call me. I'm not going to be included in this, and I think I have something to contribute. So for anyone who's on this call that hasn't been called yet, then we really do look for and value your feedback here.
I think the message is getting out because my phone is blowing up, so I can't see the screen, but I can hear it across the table here. So thank you for responding to that, folks. So I think we promised an answer to the question, so what can I do? Certainly this is a huge ask. I hope that this is something that many of you do participate in the peer review process. There's a couple other suggestions that we have as far as coffee professionals, engaged coffee professionals or coffee adjacent that want to contribute. One thing I think it seems simple, but is worth noting is to support the work of the PCR as we move through these stages, really looking towards this resolution and recovery. One of the things that's worth noting is that the resolution and recovery activities tend to take the most time of crises. Entering a crisis can sometimes feel like a flashpoint. Certainly a natural disaster is an example of that. And the resolution following a responsible risk assessment is something that takes some time, as well as the overall recovery. It doesn't happen overnight, and we ask you to really reflect on that and fully commit to it. Another thing that is something we really encourage anyone or everyone to do is to raise awareness, but also to educate yourself. My family was invited to a birthday dinner for a friend last night, and we had, of course, sometimes it comes up, as people think that the work we do in coffee is interesting. So my friend's parents had asked, okay, so what is this? What is the coffee price crisis? What do you mean by that? And I felt really confident talking to people who really are coffee consumers. They're very interested in it. But I got that way, not from the work in the PCR, but through really educating myself, reading a lot of the mass media articles that are available, and certainly the coffee trade. Daily Coffee News, those of you that follow the online arm of Roast Magazine, Daily Coffee News said it was the most mentioned term for them of 2018. They have a great resource that really aggregates all the times the price crisis was mentioned. And SCA.coffee/price crisis is another one that has really gathered a lot of these articles together from the mass media as well as coffee media. This is a really good way. Some of SCA's own produced content, particularly the podcasts and YouTube videos from RICO 2019, are extremely helpful in understanding not just how we got here, but what have other industries faced? What are the experts saying? And really taking the time to listen to that and reflect on it in your own activity. One thing that anyone can do now is this call to know your supply chain. So what does that mean? Whatever position you occupy, roaster, greenie, producer, barista, all the other actors within that we know take to bring that specialty coffee into reality. Really, I encourage and implore everyone to get a sense of your own supply chain and start having these conversations about changes to the model. This was the #1 output of Berlin. Those of you that have signed up to be peer reviewers will see this, was this need to really address how can we change the business model of specialty coffee. And so the early, we don't have an answer to that, but it certainly is something that wouldn't happen without having those relationships, or at least absent a relationship, knowing who we are in these supply chains and being able to have the conversations. I heard an interview with the current chief marketing officer of Dr. Bronner's soap. So that's the soap that has like all the words on it, and they're sort of known for their political views. And her name's Lisa Bronner. She's the granddaughter of the founder. And the question they asked her about, like, how does this political landscape enter into the current business model for Dr. Bronner's soap? And what she said was, well, the company started as a way for my grandfather to get his political beliefs out there. He didn't really care about soap, but he wanted to make a responsible product, printed his political beliefs on it, and sold the soap. Now the company's really evolved, and they are a well-known organization that's very committed to sustainability and to several sustainability causes. But she said their position is all about raising awareness. She said, we're not actually trying to get people to change. When I heard that, I found that very surprising. How could you not want to implore change? Isn't that the point? What she was trying to say and what she said was, maybe people will change, maybe actions will change, maybe people will get inspired. We're leaving that up to the person. We respect people's individual choices, and we're not trying to change anyone. But I guarantee no one will change if we don't take that first step of raising awareness. I thought that was really inspiring. I think it is important. And even if it means a conversation at your friend's birthday party who doesn't work in coffee with their parents who definitely don't work in coffee, but being able to articulate and have a sense of just what's happening. That is so impactful. Sometimes we think it's not, it really is. And then finally, no surprise, what can you do? Become a peer reviewer. So those are the sort of 4 suggestions we have for you today, with many, many more to come in the coming months.
All right, and I think that, as usual, we have less time for questions than would be ideal, but we're going to, I'll blow through this timeline here and say that coming up, we'll be publishing these approaches and interventions mid-September, probably realistically late September, but having this information publicly available and plenty more discussions to come. Vicente, you're muted.
You can't hear me, but now you can. I'm back. All right, thank you so much, Ellie and Kim Elena. As you said, Kim Elena, we have just a few more minutes, but Ellie and Kim Elena, can you stick around for another 10, 15 minutes so we can take some questions? We've got plenty of questions here. I've been reading your questions, everyone. I see a few folks have their hands up who want to speak. I want to start with, I'm going to merge a couple of questions that we received that are sort of similar. This one's for Kim Elena, but I'll start by reading a couple of the questions here, or some of the comments too. So Mark says, our house is burning down. The webinar so far illustrates the passivity in general. It's a discussion about whether we should call it a fire, and B, call the fire department, whether we should call it a fire and call the fire department, and C, get out of the house. We better get moving. Another sort of similar sort of related question is part of the objective of the PCR to increase the price that coffee farmers get. When do you anticipate results? And so that was, it made me think a little bit about. I want to talk a little bit about the objectives of the SCA's initiative related to the price crisis, right? Some might feel, like Mark might feel like this feels a lot like an academic exercise, right? So I'd love to hear from you, Kim Elena, like what, maybe talk a little bit about that. What is it? What is it not? Right? What are some of the things that, what would you say to somebody who says like, well, this feels like a lot of talk, a lot of great, an academic exercise, but what comes after this, right? And to talk a little bit about that, please.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that, and we've used sort of a health metaphor before about this being both a chronic condition and also like a immediate, the heart attack is the metaphor that we've thrown around. But and I know that there's a lot of pent up frustration, and that is on the part of anyone in the supply chain. I mean, certainly producers, but there is an academic component to this exercise, in as much as in order for us not to just sort of act on act as individuals, individuals within the association as staff people, act as individual companies, then some kind of process has to be gone through to identify what do we have in common, or what's the sort of bigger opportunity. And that is not to say that anyone should not take opportunities, again, in their own supply chains, for coffee value chain actors. I think from the SCA, we've certainly taken opportunities that we have, like at our events, because we do a lot of events. We do education, and we launched a sustainability course. So these are activities that the SCA does that we are actively looking at and changing, because we see that this situation is immediate and it's urgent. And so, as an association, what can we do? Well, we don't trade coffee. We don't buy anything off of the commodities market or not. So that is not an action that we can take, but that's certainly an action that people within our community can take and should be taking. So there is, in no way am I saying, wait, everyone, don't act now. Wait until the SCA comes out with some recommendations in September or later in order to change your practices. Like the complete opposite. It's just, I think, a matter of recognizing the diversity of stakeholders in our community also, that we have, 11,000 members, and that's just members. That doesn't even count people who attend our events who aren't members or who take our educational classes. The recommendations for each of them are going to be different. It's not one single solution. It is a suite of many different solutions on many different timescales. Did that answer the question? I mean, I feel like I spoke to the immediacy part of it versus long term, but I feel like, Vicente, your question might have been more nuanced. So if I missed something, just let me know.
No, I think that answers it. Maybe not to put you on the spot here, but what is it not? If right, we all feel a sort of sense of urgency because of the most recent dip in the market, or one of the most recent dips in the market. What is the initiative not going to do? If maybe that's a difficult question to answer. That you think people are looking for maybe in the industry.
Well, I mean, I think my immediate response to that is that the initiative isn't going to offer us a single solution. You know, it isn't to kind of create. There have been all sorts of different calls on the SCA to, you know, establish an alternative market to the C market, and that, I mean, a part of me wants to say that nothing's outside the realm of possibility, but that's not something that the Price Crisis Response Initiative is going to do. You know, when we talk about this initiative versus talking about the future of the Specialty Coffee Association, I mean, you know, one of my collaborators in this PCR initiative is famous for saying, you know, we are the SCA, talking about not just staff, but volunteers and members and, you know, community stakeholders. So, you know, how this initiative informs our future, I think that anything really is possible. But a one-year initiative is not going to be able to accomplish something like that. So I think in that sense, it's important also to separate what we can do in a year from what we could potentially do to create a system that we think is just and distributes value equitably.
Okay. Thank you, Kim Elena.
Yeah.
We have a question here from Pete von Osten. The question is the price crisis of coffee structurally different from several other agricultural commodity price crises in countries / crops that don't have any colonial history? I'll leave that open, Ellie or Kim Elena. I'll repeat the question. Is the price crisis of coffee structurally different from several other agricultural commodity price crises in other countries and other crops that don't have any colonial history?
Well, I can say that I'm not an expert in any other crop. So if there's one in particular that this person is thinking of or has some expertise in, then you know, I think being a citizen of the United States, that we can talk about, or I can speak with like a very basic operational knowledge of some of the price volatility or fluctuations or drops in markets for products that we grow a lot of here, and talk about how those are structurally different. But I'd love to know if there's like an example that someone would say, how is this different or similar to soybeans in China or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also worth mentioning that we looked for many of these types of initiatives with outside of coffee with the first round of research toward producing the landscape assessment. And so I think that asset, which is the early draft of it, is expected around late September, maybe earlier than that. That will speak to some of these other initiatives that we've studied. And like Kim said, if there's one in particular that someone has to suggest, please do. We did look at tea, bananas, cocoa, a couple different initiatives within those industries. The one I looked at most closely was the Cocoa BOD in Ghana, which was a government and private industry collaboration, mostly a government initiative in one country that has been really manifesting for close to 70 years. So we've tried to learn a little bit about what other initiatives and interventions have taken place in commodities writ large, learning lessons learned and what could be relevant for coffee going forward. So I think that it's a little bit more complex to answer on a soundbite here, but I think that the landscape assessment is really well positioned to do that. So when the draft of that's available, I would say look for that.
And one more thing, I know we probably have a lot of questions, but it occurred to me as you were talking, Ellie, and giving those examples, that those are all, the person had asked about the kind of juxtaposition of colonial coffee with not colonial something else. And that, you know, one aspect that probably that unites all of those, you know, colonial commodities is the sort of value crisis piece. So there's an aspect of this, it's about the actual price, like, you know, what is that price on that commodity futures trading market? But then there's a part of it that's about how this product is valued by buyers toward producers, you know, how labor is valued, how consumers value coffee and have been taught to value coffee, and that there are definitely domestic markets, say, if a crop is produced and consumed closer to its point of origin, that there isn't quite the same sort of crisis of value that goes along with many of these longer supply chains and colonial legacies.
Thank you. We have here a question from Daniel. Daniel says, although it seems early in the research, is there any consideration to separate specialty from the C market, since both commercial and specialty are intertwined in the futures market? How viable is this? I know this is a question that that lots of people have. Who wants to?
Yeah, this is. I mean, the questions about what is specialty coffee that have arisen from this the exploration to date have been some of my favorites. So I think, again, just like we got to this question about, well, how do we define a crisis pretty soon in this, was the question of, what specialty's role in creating this, the circumstances that we see now, and how does specialty's role need to be different in the future. Understanding that, again, as an association, we have more leverage in some areas than in others, with some stakeholders than in others, and that we are all ultimately interconnected, and I think that's especially true looking from production forward, say, if you think about the supply chain as a linear thing, but versus the buyer backward, because producers can't choose to produce only specialty coffee. I know plenty of people would love to say, yes, I'm going to produce 80 plus coffees exclusively. In fact, can we cut it off at 85 plus? But that's not a reality. That's not a choice that a producer can make under normal circumstances, to say annually, yes, I'm going to to do that. So I think that, to me, that suggests that we need to think about the whole picture, but also, again, recognize that that we have, as an association, the most influence in sort of certain roles in that supply chain, value stream, and exercise our leverage there, and that how we define or don't define specialty coffee, and who does the defining, who determines when a coffee is specialty or not, or how that the assessment that determines its worth, or that determines its value is given. Those are questions that I think potentially are very rich ones, because they open the door to a lot of change in the future. But I think that it would be short-sighted to say we just need to separate specialties somehow from commodity coffee without looking at the ways that they're intertwined, and who does the separating.
And this was alluded to in the causal loop that was presented a couple slides ago, where it said breaking, the idea of the forcing producers into this price taker role. And for those not familiar with that term, what that really means is that the production of quality versus an lack of relevance to quality doesn't change what the market trades at. And so I think that it speaks to the role of specialty, in a sense that we do have a hunch that specialty coffee could be an exception to that, if we are able to really look at the changing of the model overall. But I think we're stuck currently. We see ourselves sort of stuck in this loop that attempting to change that has had the effect of continuing on in the same closed loop so far.
Mm-hmm. I want to open it up to folks who have raised their hand to speak, but I see quite a few questions around the topic of oversupply in the market, which you discussed earlier in the presentation, in the webinar. And I'm going to try to sort of merge some of these questions. And essentially, the question that people are asking is, on one hand, you say that oversupply has been identified as a potential problem or catalyst or part of this crisis. On the other hand, we hear, hey, there's a problem. We're going to need more supply. We're going to need to be able to produce more. And so the question is, how do we balance these two on the one hand, the need, and on the other, the problem of oversupply?
There are so many. I mean, this is one of those questions where I'm not quite sure where to start, but I'll start anyway and hope that I can muddle my way into an answer that makes sense. So yeah, this is one of those cases of holding two different realities in your brain at the same time that kind of contradict each other. That we once have a global oversupply when it comes to the quantity of coffee available today and the demand for that coffee in just pure volume terms. But even if we look at just today, I think it's also true that we have less supply of the coffee that maybe we, thinking about specialty, or at least how specialty has historically been characterized, or how we've thought of ourselves in the supply of coffee that we have counted on, and often we use washed Arabica as a proxy for that number. For the past couple of decades, there's that number is shrinking. So we potentially have less coffee available now of the sort of style and quality level that we want to buy even now. And as we project into the future, that's where we really see those those proportions posing a real risk for specialty coffee as we have kind of built the industry and the flavor profiles, because we see that washed Arabica percentage continuing to shrink, and ever more concentration of production in a few countries where it's not for every producer, but more likely to be profitable to continue to produce coffee and to make further investments in productivity and in technology and increasing competitiveness. So I think that there is an aspect of this that relates to a tension that we feel now, but when we're talking about not having enough coffee, I think without speaking for all of the different articles that forecast a dim future for coffee, there's a specialty aspect of that it's going to be harder to get the kind of coffee that we value the most highly and celebrate with our businesses. But then also, as supply concentrates, we can't talk about that only economically. We also have to talk about the climate risk that is posed by having a concentration of production in a couple of places, and the increasing likelihood of some kind of climatic event affecting coffee and putting a greater share of our supply of whatever the quality level is at risk. And then that has some economic implications too. We focused on the sort of economic picture because that's the crisis in the short term, but it is absolutely the environmental side, and the climate has been a major contributor to getting us to the situation that we're in. Ellie mentioned leaf rust, and it will be if we can solve for the crisis economically, then we better stay in crisis response mode for the environmental piece.
Thank you, Kim Elena. All right, so I just want to mention we have quite a lot of questions in here. So I'm obviously not going to have an opportunity to get to every single question, but I want you to know that we're going to respond as best as we can to every single question in the SCA News article, where you found on SCA News, you'll find the recording for this webinar. We'll go through and add responses to your questions if we didn't get to it. I do want to open it up to—
I'm scanning some of these questions. I would just say, right now, as Kim was talking, and I think there's some that I would love to get a take from Vera Rafael, who's one of the members of the Price Crisis Response Team. She's a member of our board. She couldn't attend today, but I think some of these I'd really appreciate her perspective, as well as Colleen Anunu, who's the other board member, and Niels, the other. I think that Kim and I can certainly, and we're happy to address these, but I do think that many of the questions would be more appropriately addressed with some of the other experts that we have in here. And so we would just commit to addressing those, via some a spreadsheet or something like that, and making sure that we upload it or send it out to participants.
Yeah, we'll put the answers, as we've done for past sustainability webinars, the questions and answers in the article itself, and we'll send it around to everyone.
Great.
For this webinar. So let me open it up to folks who have raised their hands to speak, And the first person who did that during this webinar was Genesis Lopez. So I'm going to unmute you, Genesis. Are you there? Oh. Hello, Genesis. I think you need to unmute yourself now. Okay. I'm going to move on to, I can't hear you, Genesis, if you're speaking. So we're going to move on to Sofia Molina. Sophia, I know you also submitted a few questions. Can you hear us? Can we hear you? Okay. We can't hear you, Sophia, if you're speaking. So let's go to Franco Ordóñez. Franco, are you there? Okay. Franco, if you're speaking, we can't hear you. Maybe you need to unmute yourself. All right, let's keep going. Zhang Yue, are you there? Hello, Zhang. Okay, we're not getting anyone.
Is this like a "it's not you, it's me" situation?
I hope it's not me. Let's give Dean a try. Hi, Dean, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes.
Yes.
Hooray. So please let me know if this is a rabbit hole, and don't feel free not to answer it. But I once read that sustainability should be pre-competitive. And I was curious what that could look like in practice.
Oof.
Sorry.
Does it have, no, does it have to be only pre-competitive? You know, as,
Great.
so as someone who's worked in with a sustainability title for longer than many, it's got like 12 years now. I have been part of collaborative sustainability initiatives, and they are some of the most rewarding work that I've been a part of, but also some of the most challenging to reconcile all of these competitive entities. In my case, it's been mostly working with coffee businesses around something that is shared and in some way sort of protected from the competitive interests of the businesses. And I think that I don't believe that we can leave it to competition at all. I think that the sort of pre-competitive space is where we can achieve like real economies of scale and be able to think longer term. But I also think that if we try to protect sustainability and say it's only pre-competitive, then we are keeping ourselves from using some of the most robust tools that we have as an association that represents more businesses wherever they are in the value stream than anything else. So I'm tempted to say like a sort of both and situation where I both know that we need to see much more investment in the pre-competitive space, but also to make sure that sustainability is dynamic and a source of like consumer engagement, value creation, all of the things that our businesses are designed to do in order for it to really become embedded.
Thank you, Kim Elena, and thank you, Dean, for your question. And I know you submitted a few other questions here in the chat, so we'll make sure to get to those. We've got.
Can I just add one thing before we move on, which is just like it might be kind of counterintuitive to the question, but this is also at the heart of why engaging experts to help us with staying on the safe side of antitrust law, and also maybe potentially reimagining that. That's the heart of why that's important. I know law is probably not the passion of a lot of people in coffee, but it's an important component of this activity. We know that already. And taking some lessons learned, sustainability, pre-competitive collaboration has sometimes, like I mentioned pineapples earlier, has sometimes treaded in that direction, or in some cases there have been initiatives that have taken taken an effort to get ahead of it and start asking the questions and engaging experts. And that's really where we want to be too. And so I think that's, I just wanted to make that connection.
Thank you, Ellie. We've got a couple of a comment and a question here from Kyle. And they're sort of they're a little bit related, but I'll read the comment first. Important to note that the thin months isn't just when prices are below $1.40. It's a consistent fact. Coffee is not enough for families. And then we've got another one here also from Kyle. I hear a lot about antitrust issues on the market side, but the entire futures market seems to be a massive coordinated approach to push risk down the supply chain. Why aren't we looking more strenuously at how we break coffee out of the commodity market?
Yeah. First, thank you for that. It's probably a reminder to me to clarify any jargon, and thin months is maybe a little bit jargony in that it assumes sort of a viewer's knowledge of food security and how harvest cycles work and payment, and that to simplify it, it acknowledges that for many coffee producers and their families, there's a gap between when the money runs out from the previous harvest and the money starts coming in from the next one, and that we refer to those as the thin months, when people tend to compensate for the lack of income by eating less. So thanks for that, Kyle. The second point about the coordinated effort and pushing risk downstream. Yeah, I think there's that's certainly borne out by a lot of the work that we have been doing and a lot of the different perspectives that we have gained over the course of this past 6 months or so. On the other hand, without from all of the experts, or all of the experts we've heard from, have given us some valuable perspective, and I would be remiss if I tried to position myself as an expert in any of these things that whether it's antitrust law or how futures markets work. But another recurring theme from these discussions is that there are ways in which this market does work. There are people for whom it works. It's not, but it doesn't work for the people who have been part of specialty coffee's growth, and who are in its who are currently stakeholders and want to be future stakeholders. So that we cannot rely upon this tool to the degree that we have to date. It cannot be our only tool. But the abolition of the tool also, it would be, I don't feel like I'm at a point yet where I could say, yeah, let's take it down, without feeling like there would be a lot of unintended consequences to that too. And again, some of the advocates for building an alternative market, or building differentiated alternative mechanisms for price discovery, would also say, but this one has its, I understand why the mechanism that we have has its advantages. Why, when it was constructed, it was to stabilize markets. So anyway, if anyone wants to hear from those experts themselves, I'd be happy to direct them to some recorded talks.
I also think we should take the opportunity to plug some of the next webinar sessions that we have anticipated for the next couple of months, including some emphasis on different price-related interventions, and I just use that in a very broad term. One example that many of us in coffee are familiar with is fair trade. They're a member of the SCA and a longtime participant, and so we're going to talk a little bit in depth about the fair trade standard and how that was established, and there will be a chance for participants to kind of ask and engage with experts on that. We also anticipate something around living income and that living income movement, and a chance for our community to engage with experts on that. I think that these are some examples that will be really illustrative in terms of not just examples of things that have been attempted and things that are working, and sort of some of the things that coffee companies can take their own initiative and kind of make their own decisions about to what degree they may want to get involved with either of these, just two of many, many examples.
Thank you, Ellie. And thank you both, actually. And thanks to everybody. I think we're gonna wrap it up here. We're at 20 something past the hour here. And I know we've got plenty of questions coming in. I wish we had more time to continue here. But we're gonna make sure, as Ellie just said, we'll have more webinars. We'll make sure to answer as many of these questions as possible on SCA News. We'll send the documents out via email. And thank you. Well, first, I want to thank Kim, Elaina, and Ellie for jumping on this webinar and talking to us about the work of the volunteers and staff of the Price Crisis Response Initiative of the SCA. And thanks to all of you for joining us, for asking these questions. I do want to make a comment that I see a sense of urgency that I think we all feel around this topic, and I read it in these questions. I just want to add that I think that the work that this group is doing on the price crisis is important. I think we all believe that, and there's more to come. As Ellie was saying, get involved in the peer review process. I've received 2 messages from folks here asking for those documents. I really want to encourage you all to truly get involved, read the documents that we'll send out to you all, send back your comments. Since I've been at the SCA, I have been part of processes like this where we actually invite our members and the wider community to peer review documents that stuff, the comments that you send in, the edits that you send in, they actually get read and they get merged into the final document. So I just want to encourage everybody on this call and everyone who might be listening to the recording or watching the recording, get involved that way. That's a big part of the work that this team is doing, and it'll definitely help. So thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks, Ellie.
Bye.
Thanks, Elena.
Thank you.